so fascinating. I just stand up here and you all expect me to say something.
Only you, honestly. Only you can do it.
Well, thank you all for making time to join us as part of the Goff Chair of Creative Architecture lecture series. I'm Goff Lecture, Dean of the Gibbs College of Architecture. It's always a joy to have not only great architects share their time with us here on campus, but I would argue, more importantly than just being great architects, we want to put in front of you great people who should become your examples, the people you emulate as you go out into the world, putting to use your talent, your compassion to the lifting of more ships in your communities. And today is no exception. I'm thrilled that we have Steve Dumez from EskewDumezRipple joining us today from New Orleans. I'm not sure any of you will remember, maybe Dan, you were here, Sam, but in around 2012, we had Alan Eskew, one of the founding partners of EskewDumezRipple, join us as a Goff Chair. And so it's great to have a sort of firm reprise, if you will. And while Alan is no longer with us, we are truly fortunate that Steve and the rest of their team is still active. I'll offer a brief introduction and let the work of Steve's office do the rest of the speaking. Just to help connect dots, Steve was also the keynote for today's session at the AI Oklahoma conference, which is taking place as we speak in Oklahoma City. It's going today and tomorrow. And I'm so proud to share that Shaquille is speaking this afternoon at the AI conference. I think Lee Fithian is also doing a session, and then I will also be offering a session tomorrow afternoon. But I just want to highlight that connection of how important it is that we, as a part of an accredited, ascending, and exceptional architecture program, that we remain connected to our profession and knowing what we do there. The purpose of our faculty presenting at the AIE conference is to help practitioners know that the research and the teaching that we do here is so relevant to the success of practitioners out there. So that's a little bit of a background that I want to share. The bio that the firm provided for you, Steve, said that we should mention that you guys have won more than 60 national awards. I think you guys have won like hundreds of awards. So the firm is being too modest. I've been a fan of EskewDumezRipple for so long. They're such a great design firm, but I'll just close my introduction to really highlight the service side of what Steve does. Again, the work will speak for itself, but the more we as architects are engaged in our community outside of practice, the better we can affect our visionary skills and continue lifting communities outside of the office. Steve is the past president of AI Louisiana and AI New Orleans, and he serves as an active professional mentor within the region. He also mentors aspiring architects who are going up for fellow. He's always looking for opportunities to support his colleagues and in some cases probably competitors as well.
Competitive buddies is what we call them.
What's that?
Competitive buddies.
Competitive buddies. That's great. So he has also chaired AI design awards programs at the local, state, and regional level, and has served on numerous design award juries across the country. He's actively engaged in many local civic organizations and has previously served on the board of the Contemporary Arts Center of New Orleans. His projects have been recently published in several books, as well as numerous national architectural and design magazines, such as Architect, Architectural Record, Contract, and Interior Design. Please help me welcome, and I urge you all to stay through the rest of the questions, by the way, after the lecture, and be thinking of questions for Steve after the lecture. Let's give Steve a big warm welcome.
Thanks, sir. Well, thank you, Hans, for that humbling introduction. Sound okay? Sound check? Thumbs up in the back. That sounds great. It's great to be on a campus where the most important, or at least largest building, is the stadium. I'm an LSU grad, so I know what that's like. It's nice to be back on a major public university campus. Now that we're all in the SEC, we're as competitive buddies, as they say, right? For the longest time, when the SEC was a little bit smaller, I would go around regionally to give lectures and would try to recruit somebody from every SEC school, except Alabama, every SEC school that had an architecture program, because it makes things so much more interesting in the fall. Every weekend, somebody's going to play somebody else, and we have a good time in the studio when we do that. Now that it's expanded, now that Oklahoma is a member of the SEC, there's a spot open, I'm sure. So think about that when you're interested. I'm going to present, as Hans said, I'm going to talk a bit about the work, but also the underpinnings and the interests of the practice. And I'm going to talk a little bit, as we start, about a little personal journey, just to set up a kind of set of influences or interests that have been a part of my career. We're a 50-person firm now in New Orleans and D.C. D.C. is a smaller practice, smaller part of the work, but it's a completely integrated team. It's not like the folks in D.C. are working on East Coast stuff and folks in New Orleans are just working on regional work. We try to, and COVID probably helped in this degree, work seamlessly together as teams so that we can really leverage talent, mentor staff, give them opportunities so that there's no isolation with individuals in the work. So I grew up in South Louisiana. This is not the house I grew up in. But this house was around the corner from my grandmother's house. And every time we visited my grandmother, we would drive up the river. This is Oak Alley outside of Vacherie. Plantation home, as you can see, the alley of oaks. The oaks were planted, I think, 80 years or 100 years before the house got built. But obviously there was another house on that site. But the thing about this and the experience of visiting this house was that as you drive up the river, you're always looking obliquely at something, and there's only this one moment as you drive straight down the axis. You could see it coming, but you drive down the axis and everything would snap into place. And the power of landscape and architecture as dual aspects of a set of experiences probably is what led me to think about becoming an architect as a young boy growing up. Now, I've always been interested in natural landscapes, but I find that most of our work, or much of our work today, is less about natural landscapes and more about man-made landscapes. I lived for a bit in LA, and it was a very interesting place to experience for a number of years. But this dialectic between the natural and the man-made is something that when I think about New Orleans and when I think about its longevity over time, New Orleans was cited precisely because of its location on the Mississippi River. And since its siting, it's not surprising given the tenuous nature of New Orleans and the river and the Gulf Coast, that since the city was founded, we've been working quite consciously to cut ourselves off from the natural landscape. And so you can see in the images on the right-hand side, flood walls that got built by the Corps of Engineers. We've essentially walled off the city from both the river, the lake, and the natural landscape. And this idea of kind of protection and refuge from the natural landscape is something of interest to me. Now, this is a bit extreme. Hello? Did I lose it? Maybe we should have changed the batteries. Red. But it's back. So this is a sort of extremist case of somebody taking a look at the landscape and making a decision. These are equally extreme. These are a little closer to home. The sort of survivalist response to stormwater or flooding. I guess that's resilience personified, right? But in addition to the consideration of landscape, and I don't know if this is going to keep going on and off, I can speak loudly.
Yeah, that works. Speaking loudly.
Yeah. Why don't I just speak up? Is that fine in the back? Okay, great. So, again, a more personal kind of journey or set of interests. Spending time out in California meant I was able to visit a lot of the land art installations out in the West. And I've always been interested in art in the landscape. Had a chance to spend the night at the Lightning Field and visit sun tunnels in the plateaus. But what is really powerful about this work, and what I think ties it to architecture, is that it's really about experience. And so, unfortunately, I wasn't there when lightning struck at Lightning Field, but nonetheless, the presence of that art in the landscape was incredibly powerful, as is sun tunnels when the sun sets or rises, and you get the markings through. So this idea that art and architecture is about experience is kind of fundamental to my interest in it and the way in which I sort of see the work. So when I start to talk about our practice and some of the projects, this is a museum project at the University of Lafayette where there was a 1969 replica of a Louisiana plantation that was the previous museum. And around the same time, I had visited a Bill Viola installation. And the power of that particular installation, Bill Viola's newborn on one image and his mother on her deathbed on the other. And the two screens are so close that you can't see the images simultaneously. You know, they're facing one another. Except for the fact that, as you can see, at least in this image, there's always the reflection of the other image superimposed. And so this dialogue between time, or between, he labeled it heaven and earth, I think of it as past and future, or past and present, was something that we were interested in advancing in this new museum project that we were doing. We were building it separate. It wasn't an addition. It was a separate art pavilion. But the entire facade, whether it's vision glass or spandrel glass, works to reflect the old museum, the history of the site, into the facade of the new. And so this dialogue is of particular interest between past and present and future. The sort of contextual architecture, vernacular architecture of the South is also a jumping off point. Here, the way oak trees filter light across a site. We developed for the State Museum a large entry porch that's carved in rather than added on to the building. And there, with a reflecting pool, reflects the state capitol in its north-facing window. But as a porch, it operates still in the way in which it's not outside, it's not inside, it's this in-between transition or threshold. But it also operates as a social space. And then at 930 Poydras, we were doing our first residential apartment tower, and we were trying to determine how we could make an apartment building, which tends to be much more private, right? People get in elevators, they go up to their floor, and they go into their unit. How we could create an opportunity for interaction between residents. So we looked at the French Quarter and at courtyard spaces that are shared by residents. You'll bump into your neighbor, either entering or exiting or using the space. So it's a social instigator. Here at 930, we force people to get out of an elevator that only goes from the ground floor to the 9th floor. You get out of the elevator, you move through this sky lobby, and the chance of you meeting your neighbor is enhanced by the experience of bumping into people and walking through. So whether it's coffee, the residents use it as an extension of their living room. And so it becomes this marker in the sky of recreating a social space of a French Quarter courtyard that has nothing really to do with the style or sense of a courtyard. So it's thinking about the way spaces are used, or opportunities to think about how you would like to create a set of experiences that drive the work. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our practice around these 4 themes. And we work to try to make sure that they're present in all the work, but obviously the dials get turned based upon the climate, based upon the client, based upon questions and budgets and sustainabilities and programs. But I'm going to start with place. And you've already seen some of these slides. But we are in a set of spaces that are incredibly powerful, and I think every place has an equal value to contribute. So I would suggest make sure you keep your eyes open and look and learn from the history of a place. I love this quote by Faulkner, "The past is not dead. In fact, it's not even past." There is this continuity in what we do. A friend quoted me a joke he tells about New Orleans and how many New Orleanians does it take to change a light bulb? 3, 1 to change the bulb, and 2 to reminisce about how wonderful the old bulb was. So there is this sense on the part of the public that an architecture in New Orleans is going to look and feel like New Orleans. Well, we think of it less about how it looks and more about how it feels and what's the experience of the place. So because styles change, types don't necessarily change, but if there was a house built in the 18th century in New Orleans versus one built in the 19th century, much of it would be similar, but it would look different and feel different. Styles change. And so how do we fit in to that continuum working in a place? Now, this is a hotel that we renovated, this existing building, 1920s. This was a parking lot. This is also a 1920s little garage that was built around the same time as part of it. This was parking lot, and then we had these 19th century buildings as part of the site. So obviously we're not going to match one or the other. this is how do you do a background building that has the quality of adding to a historic environment without replicating it. So a lot of it's understanding strategies of scale, proportion, massing, how can we relate to the context without overpowering the context. And so this is, you get to this wing of the building, the main check-ins here, we have this bridge that kind of tucks behind. In a completely different context, 12 years ago, we were invited to a competition for a museum in Greenwich, Connecticut. And here you can kind of see it's on the I-95 corridor right at the harbor. The town of Greenwich is just up the road here. But the context was one where the program was a major driver, right? We had a museum that wasn't just an art museum, it was an art and science museum. And so that had particular resonance for us, this notion that art and science in the Smithsonian's are collected in different buildings, whereas in this building, it was all under one roof. And when we started the project, we asked the director to tell us a little bit about the Bruce. What does the Bruce mean? He says, well, it's the only place where you can see a raccoon and a Rembrandt under the same roof. And we thought that was a funny and interesting way to kind of think about a museum. What they are able to do is they are able to have simultaneous shows where an art show might work to supplement and build on an exhibition that's about science. And so this dialogue between art and science, so that they're not inseparable, was part of the project. The original museum was this house that was deeded to the town right around 1910, built in the 1890s. Had been expanded. The entrance was to the north on the top of the hill. You can kind of see it here. The galleries were, an entrance was at the top of the hill, 25 feet above where people parked. So it's kind of hidden away. When we expanded and we doubled the size of the footprint with the new galleries in service, it naturally went out over the hillside and dropped down. So we were able to essentially, with the reworked parking, have a front door that was part of the park and part of the community. We were inspired by the stone of the original house, the Second Empire sort of Victorian house, but also by the stone outcroppings on the site. This post-glacial scouring of the Connecticut landscape, leaves rock outcroppings all over, and it was a really powerful condition of the site. So we were asked to think about the project more than one way. And so stone was a theme that we decided to develop two strategies. One, there are quarries up and down the Connecticut coast. So quarry carving, kind of subtracting in the manner of a quarry was one option. The other was stacking, the accreation of building stone walls. And in this case, lace walls were built where there was a lot of air and openness in between. So this was an operation we shared with the client about going from quarry and then introducing lace. This is the entry sequence through the project. What happens at night when lace goes from day to night, it becomes like a scrim. And so you see through it and into it. This is the project that was nearing completion in the snow. When you're from New Orleans, you always show a snow shot if you have one, because we never get it. It was just amazing to see. But here you can kind of see the articulation. We developed a strategy where the precast wall of the quarry breaks apart and becomes a set of sticks that run in front of the curtain wall here, representing lace. But at night, as I said, it sort of transforms into something different. At night, you also see through the building. And here, the design proposal we had captured a courtyard between the original building, or the original museum, and our addition. And so it becomes this diorama, this kind of site relic that we pull through and have an opportunity to interpret as a captured landscape. We worked with Reed Hildebrand out of Cambridge, terrific landscape architects that helped us realize this. And when you look on the inside, you can kind of see the cortin steps and the stone outcroppings and the aspens that'll grow and become this intense landscape. But also a landscape that you're in between. So you have a landscape on one side, landscape on the outside. This space of gathering almost feels like it's an outside and inside space. The stair that we developed works its way up following the slope of the courtyard, which was what we found on the site at the edge of the hill. And then on the outside, this lace wall starts to operate in a way where it literally allows light to hit the frosted glass on the inside of the stair and become a light fixture that kind of dances over the course of the day. So here's the approach from the park and how we manipulated the precast to achieve that effect. So when we talk about performance and resilience, we talk as much about building performance, but also this idea of social resilience and sustainability. When we started the practice, it's one of the first projects I worked on. I was trained at the time that we were very focused on climate. It was just after the first Earth Days. But what we were doing then was essentially intuitive design that made sense given certain climatic strategies. What we do now is we use resources, use evidence-based design. I'm sure you're getting this in school right now. Ways in which you can, and for us, increase the performance of our buildings by doing the kind of analysis and research and modeling of the work early in the design phases. And so here, you know, the strategy of using a set of shutters almost are similar to the way in which shutters operate as fins that protect and shade the glass, allows us to be much more intentional about decision making on projects. Z. Smith, our Director of Sustainability, has developed this nutrition label for our buildings. So this is done early in the process. And he kind of assesses things like energy, daylight, glazing, carbon, land use, and water. And so we work to understand how those are improving in measure so that we can deal with this climate crisis in a positive way. So our buildings are performing. We've done a lot of work measuring them early, but then measuring them later. And so we go back and do post-occupancy reviews of the projects, and those have been foundational in helping us. You know, you can kind of see the green line. When we started reporting for 2030, you know, we were down low. As we started to do this research, we were able to significantly increase it. And so we fund a research fellowship in the studio where we hire 2 fellows a year, one for the summer and one for the year, to focus on different interests of the firm, of the practice. Building performance, resilience, you kind of see them through here, right? Those fellows are not working on projects, they're not billable to things, but they are working in the studio, they're doing their research work, and they are giving talks to the entire studio and assisting people in the work and the projects. And it's been huge in the way in which we've transformed the practice. So from the first work that we did, establishing an action plan, to being able to then incorporate it in buildings has been critical. And I think it's one of the unique things in the practice, but one that has been a huge investment that pays off significantly. This is a project that we did in downtown Charlottesville. Charlottesville has a pedestrian mall, kind of like Denver's, but a smaller scale. 2- and 3-story buildings on the mall here that then, as you get up and get into the city, it begins to step up. The hillside rises up, and then you start to see scale of buildings start to rise outside. So there was a zoning code that we had to conform to in terms of height. And so our strategies of starting by acknowledging the height of the district and then acknowledging adjacent context to then develop a step form that takes advantages of outdoor spaces on rooftops and collecting water and providing great spaces for office users to take advantage of has yielded in a project that's LEED Platinum, 99% of the rain harvested, and significant energy performance. But more than that, it's really the diversity of the program contributes. So it's a chance to really build community. We worked with the developer to kind of conceptualize opportunities for different program elements to be distributed through the project. This ecology aspect of rooftop gardens and what they provide in terms of health and welfare for the users of the building. And then connections throughout. So we carved a courtyard that gives opportunities for events to happen and users to take advantage of. So here's the co-working space that's in the ground floor. So I understand that some of you may have been to the Thaden School, that y'all have done some drives and kind of used it as an opportunity to go visit. This is a project that we did with Marlon Blackwell Architects and Andrew Pogon as landscape. And the collaboration between the three of us, I think, was critical to the outcome. Two different architectural perspectives, one based in the place, one outside of the place, and then a landscape architect working with us in tandem. So obviously Marlon Blackwell knows the Ozarks well, so the whole natural and agricultural landscape was something that we were introduced to, but also the cultural landscape and understanding the relationship that the school would play to the town. The school had been the site of the previous county fair, and you can see it here, the Arts District, Main Street running up to downtown. When we started the project, there was no program, and this is something that I know if you're doing a thesis, you have the opportunity to develop your own ideas about what you want to explore from a programmatic standpoint. But when you get into practice, you might find yourself where part of the skills that you're learning are how you can bring to the table a whole set of ideas that can contribute to how the project might become as it relates to program. Clayton Marsh was the head of school. He was the only person hired when they hired the architectural team. But he had spent enough time in the Ozarks to think about the pedagogy of the school. And it's really revolves around learning by doing. And so he saw a bike culture in the place that he thought was really important to plug into. Agriculture and food production and art and movie making. So he kind of themed it as meals, wheels, and reels. Something where each of those could contribute to a holistic education. It's middle school and high school. But it was really about experience and learning by doing. And so when we started and Clayton started to hire faculty, we spent a lot of time in conversations with the community, going out and having meetings, trying to understand how they thought they could contribute to the school as a community partner, but also how the school could invite them in. this dialogue back and forth with the community. And so there were a whole series of partners, as you see here, that we met with over months as we began to develop the program for the project and how that program might get distributed on the site. Then as we started site planning, you know, this agricultural, the chicken sheds that you find in northwest Arkansas, there's the chicken sheds all lined up east-west, you know, the right orientation on plan. But, you know, then looking at farm groupings and other strategies, thinking about it as something that operates in between the urban and the pastoral or the rural, which is where most work tends to happen. If it's not urban, it's seldom purely rural in our case. So this in-between was of great interest. And so this is our final master plan. 4 buildings around the educational program of the school, a bike barn for sports and for pump track. And, you know, we looked at different strategies for how we would incorporate aspects of the site which were critical. The outdoor space, Clayton was very clear that he didn't want a school that was completely shut off from nature and that students would have to know when it's raining. They move from here to here to here to here over the course of the day. And so they're constantly moving across the site and taking advantage then of the site to create opportunities for productive landscapes and other means by which we could use the landscape and the campus as a teaching tool means that students are constantly exploring the outdoors, the landscape, and the site rather than simply being in classrooms, and that was critical. So I'm going to touch a little bit on the home building, which we did as an early phase to the project. You can kind of begin to see the obvious precedents of farm buildings, barns. Here's some different precedents in Arkansas barn dance with heavy timber. Here, you know, the idea that we would develop a dining room. This is like Hogwarts kind of inspiration. But this idea that there are always connections from inside to out. Students start their day here and they end it there. Here you can kind of see this idea of incorporating a nomenclature that might allude to barns without necessarily being a barn. Dog trots, porches, landscapes, and then connections. So the productive landscape moves into a teaching classroom for the students right next to the production kitchen for lunch. And so this learning by doing operates at multi-levels. And so equity. For us, making sure that we are designing and contributing to the broader society that we're working for has always been a critical aspect of the practice. This is a project where we're doing for the government nearing completion in Greenville, Mississippi. We are partnered with Duval Decker out of Jackson doing this. Roy and I have been friends and colleagues for years, and we've looked for opportunities to work together. And this came along. We said, let's do this together. Greenville was an incredibly prosperous place before the Civil War, but that prosperity was limited to a small segment of the community, primarily white, and it was built on the backs of slaves. And so when we began to think about the issues that the community had faced over centuries, really, and the idea that we would build a courthouse in this place that represented justice for the community, it was impossible to think of that independently of the sort of history of the place and the nature of the community. Now, a little bit of history. You know, when the federal government initiated building the federal courts, the first federal buildings built in what then were states that became part of the United States. 1789, Thomas Jefferson envisioned a classical Greek revival, hearkening back to the Greeks, as a means to create a significant federal presence in a community that was probably nothing more than, wooden shacks, a collection of scattered wooden shacks. And so those got distributed in district courts throughout the South, but with a very clear stylistic mandate of a sort of classical vocabulary. And that classical vocabulary has been carried forward for quite some time. 1932, I always envisioned that the Supreme Court, it was a building that's been around forever. Well, it was built in the 30s. And now we're being asked to consider that this is the only vocabulary. There's a presidential edict that establishes this as the only means to build federal courthouses or federal work, is to make it part of a classical order. Well, building a classical or neoclassical architecture in Greenville, Mississippi was a misnomer for us because over time, and in this particular case, pre-Civil War, the classical architecture was appropriated as part of the big house of plantations. And it struck us as completely inappropriate to think about an architecture that in a place like Greenville was associated with this instead of associated with this, that we would somehow design the courthouse to speak to that. It seemed like a miscarriage of justice, so to speak. So as we began to look at the design, here's our site, here's the river, thinking about the original kind of single-room courthouses, where you understood that building as being the court. There was very little associated with it other than the courtroom, right? They had the steps, the porch, a few miscellaneous rooms that supported the court use. But it was really a courtroom courthouse. Today, courthouses are really complicated programs that include all sorts of uses. The marshals, clerks of court, magistrates, the amount of space associated with the court functions completely subsumes the courts as an entity. But here we said, well, how can we make them visible? How can we make them clear that this is a courthouse, courtroom? So we pulled them out separately. We developed a bar building behind that houses all of the support functions of the court. And in this courtroom block, we have entry, jury assembly, and the two courtrooms, the magistrate and the district courtroom, stacked on top of each other. And, it has antecedents, this kind of raised French plantation model of galleries to the outside, the space contained on the inside, and support really below. The living is all raised. Gave us an opportunity to think about the interstitial space between the curtain wall, modern security, modern technology, rather than outdoor space, the curtain wall between it and the courtroom, which we rendered in wood. And the wood is also a shutter so that the courtroom inside gets daylight and view out while still being secure. So here's the entry. You come in, jury assemblies below. Here's the courts above, and you can see here behind the body of the courtroom support spaces that function. So this project will be complete at the end of the year. Here you can see it nearing the end of construction, all on the site, operating almost as a lantern for justice. So the last project I'm going to share and touch on is goes all the way back 20 years. We're celebrating, well, we're acknowledging the 20-year anniversary of Katrina this year, last month, 2 months ago. And so this issue of catastrophe and the impact that catastrophe has on a community. Hans took me to go see the memorial in downtown Oklahoma City, which I discovered is 30 years, acknowledging a disaster 30 years ago. This question of memory, how we think about significant acts, how we respond to them as a community, was something that we reflected on significantly this year as we looked at 20 years since Katrina almost destroyed our city. So here you can kind of see the size of Katrina as it approached, but also the flooded area of New Orleans. Now, I did an overlay of this onto the District of Columbia. It would exceed its size by about 50%. So it's hard to understand exactly how big this is. But 80% of the city was underwater in some fashion. Anybody who made a decision to stay in that community was fully invested because we all had to evacuate. All of us were out of the city for 3 months, 2 to 3 months, before anyone was allowed back in. And so there were a set of conversations and a set of planning exercises that were done that incorporated the entire community. And so this dialogue of making sure we as designers understood the desires and needs of the community while thinking creatively about how to solve those issues in a very complicated set of circumstances was key. And this is Alan, by the way, for those who may remember when he was here. Central to many of those conversations. One of the projects that emerged out of it was a library and a community center that we did in the Broadmoor area. Now, that area, and you can see this map, how much water. New Orleans is a bowl. High levee at the river, high levee at the lake, and then all of the ground kind of recedes, with the lowest area being what was swamp and was pumped out reclamation project, continuing to subside as we've pumped it out. Those levee walls that I showed you early kind of are fingers of the lake that come in where the pumps were originally located at the turn of the century. Broadmoor is down here, another low spot. So Broadmoor was here. There was a plan that was done before the community got together. This plan was roundly rejected. You can kind of see the anger here. Where certain neighborhoods were determined to be unsafe. It was done with no community planning. It was done by a group that came in with ULI with good intentions, but in the end met with huge resistance. And one of the issues is that every one of these green dots is in a low-income community of color. District 5 right here suffered just as much as District 6, but that was a relatively affluent white neighborhood. So all of these neighborhoods were below the mean for poverty and also persons of color. It got roundly criticized by the community. In fact, Broadmoor organized with the support of the Kennedy School and others to rally to save Broadmoor. And one of the first projects that FEMA funded there was a community center and a library. This was the original library. This was the house That was the community center. It was retained. It got about 6 inches of water in it. We raised it higher. This building was lower and got more water, and FEMA replaced that. So this is our replacement library that we did as part of the project. What we were interested in doing was, again, resilience and sustainability. We developed a plan that's essentially a spiral with a pinwheel structure that wraps around, that organizes the program underneath it. And that spiral takes all the water and brings it to one location where a scupper drops it down and leads out to a rain garden in the front. And here you can see it at night, the transparency that this north face gives to the community. Here's the interior, all wood, steel structure where the pinwheels occur, but we developed a strategy to establish this datum with all the glazing protected depending upon its construction. And the green dot plan, which was a huge problem for the community, became something for us to build on. The client told us early, the community organizer we were working with, that she planned to name the cafe the Green Dot Cafe, just to thumb her nose at the previous administration. And as a result, we developed a rain screen, a metal panel wall system where we used a waterproofing behind that was lime green just to do the same. So the building is thousands and thousands of green dots, which we thought was amusing. To wrap up, as we've invested more in the community, we've spent a lot more time. We've always done pro bono work, but we've been much more intentional about it. 10 years ago, a little over 10 years ago, we started a day of service. We had always done things in the community, contributed our time, whether it was painting houses for the Preservation Resource Center or contributing in a lot of ways. It struck us that there's a unique skill set that we as architects can provide, helping clients solve issues or problems that only an architect can solve. And so we established a day of service, and we advertise for proposals from nonprofits around the community. We usually get a dozen or so. As an office, we review them, we vote on them as a group, and we shortlist maybe 4 or 5 projects that we will focus on. And that day of service is one day of an architect's time to help you solve your problem. But it's a lot more than a day, because there's a whole planning exercise that has to happen before. There's meeting with the nonprofits, developing strategies for how we can really leverage that one day. There's the day, but then there's the follow-up. I show this, though, because in lieu of the way we used to work, as principals being asked to do pro bono work and us finding staff to do it, what we've done as a firm is we've established it so that young architects, not yet project architects or project managers, young architects become team leaders for the teams. And it's a chance for them to take over a project and really leverage a growth curve for them by having them meet with the clients, having them have the communication, and having us use it as an opportunity for leadership development. And it's been hugely successful. It's I think one of the best things we do at a lot of levels. So it's allowed us to contribute to the community. The community comes in, we get to know them better. Every year we've got, as I said, 4 or 5 different groups coming in. And as a result, we've developed skills in a younger generation that sometimes take longer to build if you're working under leadership. In this case, you flip the script, and we're working for them. So to close, Alan always, my partner Alan Eskew, always saw architectural practice as really being much more than just doing projects. He expected us, every year at annual reviews, we would sit down and we would have to tell him what we were doing in the community. You know, are we serving the AIA or a professional association? Are we a member of our neighborhood association? Are we serving on the board of a cultural facility? There was an expectation that everyone, not just principals, everyone in the studio would do service at some level. We started the local chapter of NOMA out of our studio. Jose Alvarez, now our principal, started it. Project Pipeline has been an initiative we've been investing in. So this idea that as architects, we're going to do projects, and those are really important, but those are just one piece of the puzzle, and really finding ways that you can contribute, invest, spend time in the community, wherever it is, wherever you end up, to really understand clients, their needs, and the community that you serve is really important. So I'll just leave you with that, and thank you. Happy to take any questions.
So it seems like in a lot of your projects, the idea of transparency is very important, like looking in from the outside, and in your community work as well, the idea of transparency seems very integral to the way that you work. Could you talk about the way that your firm practices transparency in their practice, and how those skills can be applied by like young designers moving into design? How can we practice transparency in our work?
Well, that's an interesting question. So this idea of transparency, right? The first project I showed with the glass being held up, glass, yeah, there's transparency, but there's also a quality of reflectiveness that many times of the day glass is anything but transparent. So this idea of transparency is this dual thing, in and out. And I think for us, the idea of transparency is just trying to, it's more an abstract sense, not an architectural sense, of working to be open. We try to be transparent and open with our staff about how we manage the work, what's important to us as leaders in the practice, what are the financial markers that we expect everyone to hit. You know, transparency for us is not just physical. It's operational, and so that's important. And I think that working to be transparent has its benefits. Oftentimes, when I find myself wanting to hold information in and not share, I find that in the end that's the wrong response. That there's a great desire on the part of young staff to understand what professional practice is all about, and sometimes it can be relatively opaque. You know, what are the measures by which you decide to invest in one project and have another project contribute to it? So the whole idea of how we monitor overhead factors and time in the practice needs to be transparent, because otherwise people don't know how much time they're investing in the work. From an architectural standpoint, yeah, a lot of the projects that we showed have a tremendous amount of glass. Glass is a double-edged sword. You know, there's great value in what it contributes to interior environments, but then there's always the energy issues that revolve around it. So we're always cognizant of where we're looking to introduce glass, where we're looking for transparency, how do we protect it, what are the benefits. So it's always a dial that we're turning. Lawrence, did you have something?
Yeah, I was just curious if you would elaborate a little bit more, and great presentation, by the way, inspired work. A little bit more on the fellows program? Like how is it, how is it that you can maintain that? Obviously, it's part of your operational cost, right? And so then the benefit has to be significant. Like, what are some of the other benefits that have come out of the Fellows Program, that kind of validate for you and your partners that it's worth investing in the research?
Yeah, that's a great question. We probably haven't been as transparent about that because there are some people who ask that same question, how do we justify it? I think it's been profound. I think it gets us to tables and conversations with potential clients in a different way, certainly with higher educational clients who understand research and appreciate, and we do research on every project, and everyone in the studio does research. This is different, right? It's not project-based, it's thematically structured. But it contributes to projects, and it contributes to the knowledge base of the entire studio. Some of our fellowships have been embraced significantly. It's like the whole studio. When we start to talk about healthy materials and health and wellness in the built environment, I doubt there's a single person in the studio that hadn't had that switch turned on, and when they're selecting materials is thinking about where it's sourced, what's its life cycle, how does it contribute to a quality environment. Others maybe less so, but that's on us because we pick the topics. It's a staff person, right? So we're funding one additional staff. It might mean that we don't have another administrative staff or another marketing staff, right, which also don't contribute to the bottom line. But I really do believe that the contribution is something that builds up a knowledge base and allows our team to contribute more significantly and efficiently in the work, and it certainly has changed the culture. So it's a cost, but it's really an investment, and we justify it because it's important to us. And it's just like anything else. Maybe we do one less competition this year. Speaking of competitions, though, we did have a year where, two competitions that we entered as a studio where the fellow was a significant contributor. One was a Living Building Challenge that we did with, again, healthy materials and looking at red label and material contributions to a project. That was one. The other was a open competition on next generation envelopes that one of our fellows was researching emerging technologies in envelopes. And so while she was doing that, we were thinking about the interior, and we had a whole team working to think about the way in which people could use a more dynamic a building from a mechanical and wellness standpoint, comfort standpoint. And the team ended up winning this competition. So what's the value in that? Well, you can't really put a number on that. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Yes?
Do you publish this research you do in-house? Does it stay in-house?
Yeah. Great question. Thanks. I'm sorry. I should have mentioned that. It's on our website. Open source, right? It's important for us to think about everything we do. In fact, you can get information on how we structure the day of service. But the research fellows work over the course of, one's a summer and one's a full year. So we get three months of overlap where we kind of ramp it up. And then the fellow takes it to the end, and that last fellow works with our marketing team to publish and document the research over that year. So there's a deliverable and an expectation of a deliverable. they've taken different, they've ranged from relatively thin to the equity guide is a guide that you could probably download. But it's a book. We published a little book as a guide for looking at equity. And so it's all open source on the website, and you can download it all and see what happens. So it's important for us to think about that, because much of the work that the fellows are doing is going out in the world and finding things and aggregating work that's already been done, and then finding ways to weave it into the work that we are doing. And so a lot of the examples that might end up in the paths to carbon zero is work that we're doing and work that fellow contributed to the team to help us find ways to reduce carbon in the building. But yeah, it's all available. Yes?
How have the new technologies, I'll say, things like AI, have had any impact on the research or the production of projects?
Well, we've been dipping our toe in the water on some of that. We did a concept design for a music museum a couple of years ago. It's on the website. I didn't share it. But we were interested in using AI to generate content that was inspirational, not necessarily architectural. So we took different musical instruments, ran them through an AI program, and gave us some outputs that implied some spatial qualities when you combine a tuba and a trombone and something else. And so it became inspiration for how we would maybe think about space and think about the use of the inspiration of musical instruments, how that could become architectural. We didn't really make spaces using AI, and we still don't. We will use AI to generate some renderings now. Occasionally. They're not great, right? They're not there yet. One of our team members was using a program and just putting in specific catchwords to generate stuff, and it was amazing to see what he would do, what he would get out of it. But it would be architecture, renderings of something like a Viking hotel done by Peter Zumthor, right? You just put that in, and you get these amazing images. So he was having fun with that, but we've never really used it in a project sense, except for that instance where we kind of inspired by musical instruments. So it's supposed to be the future. I'm getting out the door fast enough to where I'm guessing I don't have to see it.
For projects that have particular cultural expectations for like what they should be, like the courthouse, have you had community like pushback or client pushback? And if you have, what do you say to convince them that your design is worthwhile?
Well, I will admit that when you work for judges, there sort of is an expectation that a courthouse project is going to have white columns. And the GSA goes through a process and introduces peer architects as part of the process that help break down this client and architect and judge relationship. But it's important to develop trust between that gulf, right? And so the first order of business was getting hired. So they knew the work that we did, and there weren't many white columns in the work. But they still hired us, and it was the judge was one voice in the room, but she was comfortable that we would find a way to allay fears. But it's constantly a dialogue, and sometimes it's tough. you have to really work at those conversations. Now, we had to do a deliverable early in the design process, program of requirements. And that POR document wasn't just a program. We worked with an architectural historian from Mississippi State to write an entire narrative about the development of Greenville, social, architectural, everything cultural. And that was part of the program requirements. The climate response was part of the program requirements. That aspect of what does the architectural image of a building represent to a community was in the POR document. And so that was early groundwork in establishing a dialogue about what was appropriate for that courthouse. And trust me, there were lots of conversations where it was like, that doesn't look like a courthouse to me. And we had in the document, well, courthouses don't always look like justice to people. Depending upon your perspective, your point of view, the history of the place. So that was all a dialogue that got set up over time, and you have to develop trust with your client, and they have to know that you have their best interest to get anywhere on any project. So, trust. And communication. Z. Smith in our office has a great friend who's an amazing engineer, mechanical engineer, works all over the world. His comment to Z was, I've never met a great architect who wasn't a great communicator. So being able to convince people of your ideas, having a story that you can tell about why you're proposing what you're proposing is also important. Yes?
A lot of your projects had a characteristic of the local region. You brought up the example of Greenwich, Connecticut, or whenever you're talking about the community aspect of the courthouse. Is there a region or a location of project that you want to work on in the future?
Great question.
I want to do them all. I think working in a well, it's interesting. I will say to everyone who's left here, travel a lot. Understanding different cultures and different places, and seeing things, and understanding what moves you as an individual. I'm constantly thinking about experiences that I've had. Those early images of the art sites, really powerful. Nothing to do, well, they have everything to do with architecture, right? It's experience, and that's what you're looking for. And so I'm always looking for places that allow us, and I didn't know that we would find this in Greenwich. I did spend some time in Connecticut for grad school, and so I had stomped around old quarries, so I knew them. But hadn't really thought about what I would do if I were to build in that place. And so it took, a lot more than just me, a team of us looking and researching and thinking about the place and what was the inspiration going to be. And so that was an effort that emerged out of the project. So I don't think we come to anything with a preconception about what's going to work or what's not going to work. It's all the research and kind of exploration of trying to understand a place. Everything you're learning in school right now, right? Yeah.
There's a hand over there that's been up for a while.
Oh, sorry. Thank you.
Can you remind us of the material that's on the facade of the Bruce Museum and why it was
You're asking why we chose the representation of the exterior of the Bruce?
Yes, and what material it is.
Oh. So we started with the stone, right? The stone was the inspiration because of the outcroppings on the site and everything. And when we did the competition, competitions are great because the client expected us to design to a budget, but the budget was kind of unrealistic to start with. We proposed a stone building, and we were going to clad the exterior of the building in stone. Now, we were going to do it in such a way that it still, it had the texture of a quarry. In fact, we had, I didn't mention this to you when we were talking about bronze and the stability of bronze, but we had designed a set of clips to hold the stone in place with the intent that the clips would rust and would streak the stone in the same fashion that a quarry, those streaks in the quarry is dirt building up on ledges. And we were going to have the clips holding the stone streak the stone. We never told the client that because the client would throw you out the room if you were going to spend all this money on stone and then streak it, right? But the building was originally designed out of stone. We couldn't afford stone. So we said, well, how can we still get that effect? So that's precast concrete, cast stone, some people call it, but it's precast. And the facade treatment is a set of textures that pick up shadow differently, right? They cast shadows. Some of them are in shade, depending upon where the sun's coming from. So it's always changing as the sun moves around the building. And so what we tried to do with the material was recreate that image of a quarry and then use the sticks held in stainless steel frames that are supported through the curtain wall, which was an interesting technical job, how you suspend that out there and not have thermal transfer through the glass. Held out in front of the glass as a series of sticks in a frame that look like the wall dematerialized into a set of units. And so it was the only way for us to think about getting a project that was going to be in budget, and it did everything that we wanted it to do. So one thing, well, the 930 Poydras was a project where we had an initial idea that we couldn't afford. It was going to be a tower with glass, much taller. The lever arm ended up being something where the foundations cost so much and the glass cost so much we couldn't afford it. So we ended up taking the top part of the tower and making an L shape to do the building. But the idea of that mixing box was in the first project, and it stayed in the second. You're going to face this on almost every project you do. You're going to have an idea about what you're trying to do, and cost is going to come into play. And it's critical to remember what your idea is and find a way to leverage everything in the project to maintain that idea, even though you're doing something else somewhere else. So the precast concrete allowed us to maintain this idea of a quarry and get the texture that we wanted to without really using stone. The change in the form of that 930 Poydras apartment building and going from an all-glass skin to a metal and glass skin, 30% glazing instead of 100%, allowed us to do something different to get the project in budget, but maintain that concept of this social instigator of the ninth floor, the sky lobby. So it's critical that when you're faced with this, and you're going to get faced with it on virtually every project, you really figure out what the idea is and make sure you fight to maintain that. So.